Welcome back to another episode with Monica and Renzo. I am not Monica. We are the authors of Lovemaking, How to Talk About Sex with Your Spouse. And today we're going to respond to responses to when we say that men and husbands don't need sex. People usually have a lot of pushback to that. So we're going to go over the most common types of pushback and comment on those and push back on the pushback.
Yes, this is basically a pushback episode. So in case that didn't track, because it didn't track with me at first, a lot of times we'll hear people, mostly wives, talking about struggles in their marriage. And one of the main struggles that we hear and see people discussing and wanting help with is that their husbands are saying that they need sex. And the wife doesn't know how to respond to that. And a lot of the responses that they get to, my husband just tells me that he needs sex, is, well, men don't need sex. And so
that seems to be not very helpful for
husbands. That's not very helpful, right? So then here are some more like nuanced secondary explanations of why a husband says that they need sex. They kind of like, this is some clarification of that, and we're going to elaborate and push back on some of those nuanced clarifications.
Yeah, because even in the last episode, we said that you don't need to have sex to have a thriving marriage. And then we also said another point that couples should be having sex. So all those things work together. If you don't believe us, listen to the other episode.
Men don't need sex.
Well, in response to that, internet says that men don't need sex to survive, but marriages need sex in order to thrive. What do you say to that? Because that seems like a very convincing argument that, like, fine, men don't need sex. You're right. They don't need sex to survive. But a marriage needs sex in order to be a good marriage.
Okay. So good pushback, because when you first hear it, I'm kind of like, yeah, absolutely. And I would say that actually, there's a lot of truth. I don't know if it's like 100% true, but there's a lot of truth to that statement, that I do think healthy marriages will thrive and sexual intimacy will be a huge component to that thriving. Because if all things are firing on like all cylinders, communication is great, mental well-being is great, like life is going really well, then I would say that if sex is not a part of that marriage, then I'd be curious of why not, because all things are going really well, and sex is often like an expression of like that thriving. Like everything's going well and we're like, our life is really good and I love you so much and you love me so much, so we're going to express that. So I would say that typically in a thriving marriage, you will see healthy and a lot of sexual intimacy. I don't think that that's necessarily true 100% of the time, because I do think that there are times in life where your life might not be thriving, but your marriage could be thriving, but your sexual intimacy might not be a huge component of that thriving marriage. Because there just might be seasons or circumstances that are challenging and sex is just not a priority, or it like shouldn't be happening because of whatever the circumstances are, but you could still have a really solid marriage and sex not be a part of it.
Right. And I two points I think to build off of that. One is that like not all sex is created equal. So we can't just say like, oh, like a marriage needs sex in order to survive. Like it can't, or in order to thrive, like it can't be bad sex and it can't be it can't be painful sex. Yeah. No, and it can't be sex where you're using one another. Like there's different things that could be happening that makes sex actually something that's hurting your marriage. So I think part of the discussion when we're talking about it is like that couples are on the same page and also fully aware and open and authentic with one another about their sexual intimacy and things that are working, things that are not working, if they're feeling used or if they're feeling like this just really hurts and we need to, like, different things need to be figured out. I think that's an important part. And like you said, sex doesn't always indicate that our marriage is thriving. I know that for us, particularly for me, I felt like we hit our peak in our marriage. No, not that things aren't great now, but like one of the peak.
We had a high moment, a high time.
Yeah. It's like it's like the stock investments. Like it was high, then it dropped again, but then it's higher than before. But when Monica was pregnant with our fifth child, and she had to be on bed rest because of health issues that we never really figured out what they were, which is a great feeling. She was at the point where her heart was going to explode if she did any type of physical activity.
That's a little dramatic, but yes. It was a heart problem that was having me on bed rest.
Your heart was going to explode. So we could not engage in any type of sexual intimacy during that time. And
too much fun.
No, it could have killed you.
Right?
Yes,
It's too much fun.
too much fun. But I do feel like that in that time of our marriage, and that ended up being a few months, and then after baby and everything. So like it was a very long period of time. I don't feel like our marriage was not thriving because I was able to sacrifice because I had to take care of the 4 other kids and try to make sure that you were okay. And there was a lot of other focusedness that I had to be able to have. And I know also for you, like you felt cared for, you felt loved, and sex was not even on the table as a possibility. And I think that if that's not possible within your marriage, then like we said in the other episodes, like then you're making sex an idol, and you're thinking like if we only had this much sex, everything would be great. And I don't think that's how things work in marriage.
Yeah, I do think that like using to go on your first example of just using sex as like a marker for good marriage or good health, like you really have to definitely like clarify like how are we approaching sex? What is our view of sex? Are we just doing it just to do it and say like, oh, we're having sex, so our marriage must be great? Like you definitely have to take an evaluation of how are we feeling entering into this? How was the experience during sex? Am I seeing this as a whole expression of love for my beloved, or am I self-seeking in this? And are they feeling like they can fully enter into this, or are they distracted? Are they feeling used? What have you? So, like, sex in and of itself is not a good marker of a thriving marriage, but it could be an indicator. Like you have to really take a good look at the whole picture.
I agree. Pushback number 2, when we say that husbands don't need sex in order to survive, is that people will say that a husband's sexual desire is not just about them seeking personal pleasure or them seeking a release, but it's actually them pursuing their spouse because they love them. What do you say about that?
So I say, like, again, that statement sounds really good. That if that is really true, that when you say, I'm pursuing sex because I'm pursuing my beloved and I want to be with her totally and completely, that's great. And that, like, if that's the virtue, like, you are not selfish in this pursuit, wonderful. But maybe then if your wife is coming into this forum in the first place and being like, my husband is saying this, how do I respond? Then your approach might not be saying or communicating that to your beloved. Like if she doesn't feel like, if your wife is interpreting this as selfish and you're saying that it's not, then what else is like clouding that pursuit? And it may be the way that you are trying to initiate. So it might be your foreplay or your flirting or you're asking for sexual intimacy, or it could be your behaviors outside of sex completely. So if your behaviors outside of sex are not aligned with like, I love my beloved totally and I love her as a whole person and I want her good and I want her best, but your behaviors outside of the bedroom are not reflecting that, then she's not going to fully believe that you're not approaching this from a selfish point of view or not.
Right. And I would like to add to that I agree that a husband's pursuit is not always about physical release or physical closeness and actual release, only if their sexual desires are rightly ordered and they have full mastery of them. Because it's very easy for a husband to rationalize and be like, well, I only want to have sex because I want to be with you. But in reality, there's part of him that is looking for a release or looking for a pacifier because things are hard. I feel lonely. I feel unloved. And again, your wife should be someone who can satisfy the need of feeling loved and feeling like you belong and feeling like you matter. Yes, absolutely. That's why God has given her to you and you've been given to her. But if sex is the only way that you experience that and you feel like that's the only way that she could actually give it to you, then you're not actually pursuing her for her, but you're pursuing her for the things she can give you. And those are two very different things. And that is disordered. It's not rightly ordered in how we pursue our beloved. So I agree that the husbands don't need sex to survive. And it is true that they may be pursuing their beloved because they just want to be with them. But if they have self-mastery, if things are rightly ordered, and yes, that is why they're pursuing. And again, that's something that a husband would know himself, and the husband and wife need to discuss together. We can't really decide that. It's not a blanket statement that it covers every couple, like, oh, every couple is okay to go for it. But if you are struggling with that self-mastery and you feel like I need this release and you're just using it as a rationalization to say, oh, no, I'm just really pursuing you, that's something where you really have to check your heart and really see what God is trying to draw out of you, because he wants something greater for your marriage than just that.
I think that if one or both of you are dissatisfied with your sexual intimacy, your sex life, like both of you need to get curious as to the why. And so, like, if one person feels manipulated, either tempted towards sex, or you are doing the manipulation of, like, I'm withholding because I need to see X, Y, and Z, like, but we're not communicating about this. We're not really sharing our hearts and sharing our, how we're receiving how the other person is loving us, how we're attempting to love the other person better outside of the bedroom. Like, if we're not curious too as to like, why is someone disengaged in this, why is someone overly engaged in this, why is this imbalanced, then it's really important to like try to get to the root of that. And often dissatisfaction with your sex life is like a symptom. It's kind of like a clue. It might have something sexual, or it might be like due to something else. And so be willing to be curious and like explore that with one another.
Number 3, this is some other pushback that you can get when you say that husbands don't need sex, is that yes, the saying might be true that husbands don't need sex, but the saying can actually be hurtful for us to fully understand the sexual experience of men. And I can agree with that as well, because when men are pursuing, if they're pursuing rightly ordered, like I mentioned earlier, they're not pursuing just for the sake of release, for the sake of being having a sexual experience, but they're pursuing because men feel closeness in doing things with their beloved. And what I mean by that, I've used an example before about the Shed Project in Australia. You can look it up really quickly. But the motto for the Shed Project is that men don't talk face to face; they talk shoulder to shoulder. And that idea comes from the thought, yes, we talk shoulder to shoulder. But the idea that like men want to grow in intimacy, but they don't grow in intimacy the same way that women do. So, like we've mentioned earlier, we are the authors of Lovemaking, How to Talk about Sex with Your Spouse. And in it, there's a lot of questions and a lot of good stories from us. I think it's a very good read, but there's conversation starters in it. And I can 100% see that a wife might go through this book with her husband and feel like the conversation starter was very intimate and that they grew in intimacy through it. But a husband can go through a conversation starter and just feel exhausted after, because he could feel like, I know that we grew in closeness, but I don't feel like we're closer after that, because men grow closeness doing something together, shoulder to shoulder. So going out and doing things together is for me would be a better way of gaining closeness with each other. So sex becomes one of those ways that like we're actually pursuing closeness with you, not necessarily just a release. Again, all if rightly ordered, it's kind of like our shoulder to shoulder thing. So if we just say men don't need sex, we don't really, we run the risk of not fully appreciating that men aren't pursuing sex just for the sake of sex. A lot of times they're pursuing that kind of intimacy because they're desiring intimacy in their lives.
Yeah, and I think this has been a lesson that you and I have really had to like work through and learn, and imperfectly done, but we have learned, surprise, surprise, in 13 years of marriage, that I did not marry myself. I married somebody who is different from me.
The skin tone didn't
didn't give it away. But so like the person that you married is not you. So the way that you best like give and receive love and intimacy and feel closeness is not necessarily, probably is not going to be the same way that your spouse does. So I think we can all agree with that statement. But then when it comes to like sex, we're like, it kind of bristles our hairs a little bit, and we get a little bit more sensitive to it. But like the way that God designed sex and the way that he designed male and female, like he made us different on purpose. And so part of me is a little convinced that like, again, the majority, like your own situation could be different, but majority speaking, that men are pursuing sex more than women are. And I think that that's like on purpose, so that this part of your married life is not like forgotten, put at the bottom of the pile, and that your husband, again, rightly ordered, is seeking intimacy, the same thing that you're seeking as a wife. You want intimacy with your spouse, but your way of receiving that and living that might not be the same. And so to really again, look at the big picture, look at your relationship. And if you trust that your husband is a virtuous man and loves you and demonstrates that outside of the bedroom, then his pursuit of you sexually is more likely not disordered, and that might be something that you as the wife need to work through and see if you're willing to engage more often.
Shoulder to shoulder.
Shoulder to shoulder.
That's a new position. And number 4. Sorry. So this is another thing that people will say in response when we say that husbands don't need sex. They will claim that the misunderstanding and that the wires crossing is actually because there's a misunderstanding of why the husband's actually pursuing, and that the wife actually has it mistaken in thinking that he's pursuing her for other reasons, and it's out of her own fear, her own insecurities of being used. But in reality, that's not what he's doing. What do you say to that?
I would say that there's probably a good chance that could be true. But again, to just like brush that off and be like, well, it's your fault, or it's your problem, or it's because of you, then that's not really like the loving way to be pursuing your wife. So if that is true and you are rightly orderly pursuing your wife for sex, and she is fearful of that, she is mistrusting of that, she is like, she doesn't want to for some reason, and like you think that it's out of fear, then be curious as to why. And maybe you might already know. It could be because she was objectified and used in her past in a previous relationship. Maybe you had done that before in the past, you as the husband, and have grown and worked on your own virtue, but the healing hasn't happened in your wife. It could be from like outside influences that she sees a lot of other relationships are disordered and the husbands are not treating their wives well, and she's kind of like got that little thought in the back of her head, and she's scared that could be true in her own marriage. So if you think that it's out of fear, then be willing to gently like explore that and understand why. And if you do know why, like really try to focus on the healing of that. So that way that is not something that you just like skip over. Because that ultimately, like, you want a willing wife, like you want her to
Right.
enter willingly. So instead of just like pushing through it, like try to heal that.
Right. And I think this is something that we had to heal from, because there was parts earlier in our marriage where I was pursuing Monica in a very disordered way. And I don't know if it's as much the case anymore, but there were points after we had reconciled and things got rightly ordered that she would still misunderstand my pursuits as being for the previous reasons that I used to struggle with before. And then to be able to show her that that's not why I was pursuing her took time. It took a lot of humility. It took a lot of me pursuing her and then not actually engaging in sex, but letting her know, like, no, I just pursue you for you. I don't really care if we end up having sex or not. I just like being with you. And that ended up being very healing for our marriage too. So if your wife does feel like that, instead of making it an intellectual argument of men don't need sex, well, actually, it's your fault that you feel like I need sex right now, or that you think that's only I'm going for because you feel like I'm pursuing you for the wrong reasons. You're afraid of being objectified, but that's not something I'm actually doing. Instead of getting into that realm, really understanding like this is where she's coming from, and then figuring out how can you love her where she is to help her fully understand that you are loving her for her, right? Because if for some reason she, I use the analogy with my kids of like, if you're trying to love, if someone's trying to give you something and you have a closed fist, you can't receive it. If that's how your wife is going into sex, of like difficulty in receiving your love because she feels fear of being objectified, like that's on you to try to figure out and heal with her, and not just try to argue your way through.
Yeah. And I think that being accepting of the fact that healing won't be linear. So you'll probably try different things to work on your healing, and then a roadblock may come up because maybe you said the same thing that had happened in the past, or she was influenced by like some other thought or some other scene came into her head, and you kind of take a few steps back and just like keep pursuing healing together, and allow her to know that she's not alone in that's not on her to heal, and you're just going to wait for the green light and like, you tell me when you're ready and I'm ready, but to really kind of like engage in that and be a part of the healing. And like the way that you respond to the no is going to be a really big part of that healing. Like you can, again, still be curious, but accept the no, and like accept it with humility and with grace, and like even like a positive disposition.
And number 5, the fifth thing that we people have said when we say that husbands don't need sex in order to survive is that the husband's sexual desire, when properly understood, is actually a reflection of Christ's desire for his church. And I think that's a great way of over spiritualizing a very human issue. So I agree actually 100% with the statement that is 100% true, that the husband's desire, the vet is calling, that is 100% true, that the husband's desire for his wife is an analogy for how Christ desires his church and how Christ desires to be with his church. However, that a lot of times when people are saying that husbands don't need sex to survive, they're actually talking about the interpersonal human issues that are happening between us. We're not talking about the spiritual reality of it. So in order to be, if you say that and like, well, a husband pursuing his wife is just like Christ pursues the church, you're kind of playing the spiritual trump card on like, well, you don't want to have sex right now, but like, reverse, like I'm actually Jesus. And like that makes things very difficult to figure out, because you're suddenly over spiritualizing and playing that trump card.
Yeah, because like, yes, our vocation of marriage is our path to heaven, and the physical act of sex is a renewal of the vows that we said on the altar. So like, it's the physical affirmation of like, I give myself entirely to you, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. I give all of that to you, and I receive all of you in return. And it's like this fullness of and you know, read Theology of the Body, all of that. So like, yes, true. But again, like, what's the reason that this isn't going well? Like, what is the reason why there is a dissatisfaction, there's an imbalance, there's some rejection happening, or there is like an over pursuit or an over, like a hyper fixation on this part of our life? Because your marriage is not just your sexual relationship, it is all of it. And that is, your sexual relationship is a huge part of that, but all of it, you are an integrated person, and your lives are integrated. Two have become one. And so like, all of this absolutely has human elements to it, and it has, you know, the propensity, the temptation to be disordered. And if something's not going right, then there's something that should be addressed before saying like, well, this is what marriage is, and you're supposed to do that when you're married, to show that you're married and that you're fully into being married. And like,
make room at the end for me.
Right.
Sorry. Sorry.
We recorded this in Advent. That was a bad play. Whoo, okay. But I again, a lot of these statements, and what's hard is like, the husbands will come back with some of these statements, or people will argue back with these statements saying like, well, husbands don't need sex, true, but like, this little pithy line comes out, and like, again, on face value, like, those statements aren't wrong or they're not bad, but they're probably most likely missing something that has led to the dysfunction, that has led to the conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to just like bypass that because this statement is true, then you're missing a really big invitation in your marriage for like holistic healing and holistic living, and like being a whole family.
Yeah. And we are not under any like, we don't believe that a 20-minute video or 20-minute episode on a podcast is going to fix anything, but we hope that it starts the conversations at least. And for the conversations, buy our book, Lovemaking: How to Talk About Sex with Your Spouse, a guide for everyday Catholics. That's the reason we wrote it. We share more stories about ourselves and just how we've fallen and failed in order to get to a place where we can openly talk about it and have the discussions without having to play the spiritual trump card ever. And if you like this video, or if we missed anything, let us know in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe. Share this with people that you think need to hear it. If you are if you are listening to us on Apple or Spotify, please leave us a review. And also let us know how we're doing. Let us know if we're missing anything.
And if you're new here, take a look at some of the older episodes. This is not the first time we've talked about this topic, and this is not the only topic that we talk about, though it might be one of our favorites. Anyways, so check out some older episodes, and we will see you at the next episode.